Introduction. Unveiling the tipping paradox. How do minor decisions ripple into seismic societal shifts? What unseen factors influence systemic change, sometimes binding us, other times unraveling us? These questions resonate at the heart of Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point, Overstories, Superspreaders, and the Rise of Social Engineering. Building upon the groundbreaking concepts introduced in his 2000 classic, The Tipping Point, Gladwell invites readers to revisit the mechanics of social contagion, this time with a lens attuned to its darker undertones. While his earlier work extolled the virtues of small changes with transformative potential, this follow-up ventures into the shadowy recesses of unintended consequences and ethical dilemmas. Imagine, for a moment, a single individual unwittingly catalyzing a cascade of events, a single action that blossoms into an epidemic of criminality, a systemic collapse, or even a public health catastrophe. From the devastating opioid crisis to the widespread fraud that plagued Miami's Medicare system, Revenge of the Tipping Point examines how tipping moments, those seemingly innocuous shifts, can spiral into sweeping disruptions with profound societal consequences. These stories are more than mere cautionary tales. They challenge us to question the structures, environments, and personalities that amplify these phenomena. What role does language play in shaping public accountability during crises? How do environmental and systemic factors conspire to produce contagions of behavior, whether noble or nefarious? Can media truly alter cultural norms, or does it merely amplify undercurrents already in motion? Gladwell's exploration is as much a forensic investigation as it is a philosophical inquiry. With incisive case studies and vivid storytelling, he illuminates the fine line between order and chaos, progress and regression. At its core, this book is an interrogation of power, the power of individuals, institutions, and ideas to engineer outcomes, sometimes without regard for their moral implications. It compels readers to grapple with uncomfortable truths, that well-intentioned interventions can yield disastrous results, and that systems designed to protect us can just as easily betray us. By considering historical events, sociological theory, and psychological insights, Gladwell doesn't merely describe tipping points, he dissects them, revealing the often invisible mechanics behind society's most profound transformations. The stories he tells, of criminal masterminds, systemic corruption, and cultural upheavals, are not only fascinating but also deeply unsettling. Each chapter serves as a window into the interplay of human behavior, environmental influence, and structural fragility. As you turn the pages of Revenge of the Tipping Point, prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the dynamics of change. Are tipping points merely inevitable consequences of complex systems, or are they deliberate manipulations by unseen hands? And, more crucially, can we learn to recognize these moments before they spiral out of control? This is a guide to understanding the forces that shape our lives, often without our conscious awareness. So, as you embark on this journey, allow yourself to be both captivated and unsettled. The world of tipping points is not merely one of breakthroughs and triumphs, it is also a world fraught with ethical quandaries, systemic fragilities, and unintended consequences. Welcome to the Paradox of Change. Chapter 1. The Mechanics of Tipping Points. What makes one moment pivotal while another fades into obscurity? The concept of a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell first introduced in The Tipping Point, 2000, posits that small changes can act as catalysts for substantial societal shifts. Yet, in Revenge of the Tipping Point, Gladwell urges us to examine not only the mechanics behind these transformative moments, but also their often overlooked unintended consequences. To understand this, we must first dissect the anatomy of a tipping point, the interplay between individuals, systems, and environments that transform seemingly minor occurrences into major events. Superspreaders and the catalyst effect. At the heart of every tipping point lies a superspreader, an individual, organization, or idea capable of igniting widespread change. In his earlier work, Gladwell celebrated the power of influencers in fostering positive transformations, such as community revitalization or public health improvements. However, in this sequel, he delves into the darker implications of such superspreaders. Consider Robert Sheldon Brown, better known as Casper, whose orchestrated bank robbery spree in 1980s Los Angeles became a case study in criminal contagion. Casper's meticulous planning and charismatic leadership exemplified how a single individual could not only exploit a system's weaknesses, but also inspire others to do the same. Gladwell's analysis reveals how systemic vulnerabilities, like insufficient law enforcement resources and socioeconomic inequities, served as accelerants to Casper's actions. His exploits became a blueprint for others, transforming isolated criminal acts into an epidemic of bank robberies across the city. This dynamic raises pressing questions. What happens when superspreaders act maliciously rather than benevolently? Can society preemptively identify and neutralize such figures before their influence becomes uncontrollable? Gladwell's exploration of these questions lays the groundwork for the broader themes of accountability and prevention that permeate the book. The overstory of environments. If superspreaders are the matches that ignite change, environments are the tinder that sustains the fire. Gladwell introduces the concept of the overstory, the unseen environmental and systemic narratives that shape behavior. In Miami's Medicare fraud epidemic, for instance, a confluence of systemic flaws, opportunistic actors, and the city's unique socioeconomic conditions created a fertile ground for widespread corruption. The city's overstory, its reputation as a hub for quick wealth, and its deeply ingrained culture of exploiting loopholes, fueled a crisis that cost billions of dollars and shattered public trust in healthcare systems. Through these examples, Gladwell demonstrates that environments do not merely react to tipping points, they actively shape and amplify them. He challenges readers to question whether societal structures unwittingly encourage the very behaviors they aim to curtail. Can reforms targeting systemic weaknesses prevent such crises, or do they merely shift the problem elsewhere? Language as a vector of influence. In one of the book's most intriguing sections, Gladwell turns his attention to the role of language in tipping points. Using a hypothetical virtual hearing set during a global pandemic, he illustrates how subtle linguistic choices can obscure accountability and reshape public perception. For instance, the passive construction mistakes were made diffuse's responsibility, while active phrasing, "we failed to act," forces direct acknowledgement. Language, Gladwell argues, is not merely a tool for communication but a potent vector for influence. In moments of crisis, its deployment can either galvanize collective action or erode public trust. By dissecting how language was wielded during real-life emergencies, such as government responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, he exposes the ethical and strategic dilemmas inherent in crisis communication. Ethical dilemmas of engineering change. Gladwell addresses the moral complexities of tipping points. While they can be harnessed to drive progress, they can just as easily perpetuate harm. Gladwell urges readers to consider the ethical dimensions of social engineering. Who benefits from these transformations? Who bears the unintended costs? And, most importantly, how can society strike a balance between leveraging tipping points for good and mitigating their potential for harm? Chapter 2. The Dark Side of Social Change. Not all transformations herald progress. While tipping points can catalyze positive revolutions, they are equally capable of spawning destructive consequences. Malcolm Gladwell peels back the layers of seemingly benign changes to expose their latent risks. By examining the opioid crisis, the cultural phenomenon of white flight, and the cascading impacts of systemic negligence, he challenges readers to confront an uncomfortable truth: the same forces that drive societal improvement can also pave the way for its unraveling. Case study: the opioid epidemic. Gladwell's exploration of the opioid crisis reveals a chilling interplay between superspreaders and systemic failures. Purdue Pharma's aggressive marketing of OxyContin targeted specific superspreader physicians, those who prescribed in alarmingly high volumes. These individuals, often incentivized by misleading data and financial perks, became vectors of addiction within their communities. The crisis was further exacerbated by a lax regulatory environment. Gladwell highlights how failures in oversight allowed Purdue's practices to go unchecked for years. By the time public health officials recognized the scale of the problem, the tipping point had already occurred. Entire communities were engulfed in addiction, leaving devastation in its wake. Through this case study, Gladwell demonstrates that tipping points are rarely neutral phenomena. They are deeply entwined with the context in which they arise. The opioid crisis, he argues, was not merely a failure of corporate ethics, but a systemic tipping point fueled by opportunism and neglect. White flight, a tipping point in reverse. While tipping points often signify growth or innovation, they can also manifest as regressions. The phenomenon of white flight, the mass exodus of white residents from urban neighborhoods, serves as a stark example. In the mid-20th century, small demographic shifts in racially mixed communities quickly snowballed into large-scale population changes. Gladwell delves into the psychology underpinning this exodus, illustrating how fear and perception played pivotal roles. As a handful of white families moved out, property values dipped, triggering panic among remaining residents. The result was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Neighborhoods deemed unstable became economically disadvantaged, further deepening racial and economic divides. This example underscores the fragility of social cohesion and the role that tipping points play in perpetuating inequality. It also raises critical questions about agency and responsibility. How much of white flight was an organic response to perceived threats, and how much was engineered by predatory real estate practices? Gladwell's analysis offers no easy answers, but it forces readers to grapple with the consequences of inaction and complicity. Systemic negligence, the power of institutional blind spots. Institutions, much like individuals, are susceptible to tipping points. Gladwell's examination of systemic negligence, whether in public health, education, or governance, reveals how small oversights can cascade into catastrophic failures. One such example is the Flint water crisis, where delayed responses to contamination warnings transformed a local issue into a national disgrace. Gladwell argues that institutional blind spots often stem from a combination of bureaucratic inertia and a failure to anticipate second-order effects. In Flint, cost-cutting measures were implemented without adequate foresight, creating a tipping point that poisoned an entire community. The crisis illustrates how systems designed to safeguard the public can inadvertently become vehicles of harm. Ethical implications of preventable tipping points. Gladwell challenges us to consider our role in perpetuating systems that enable preventable harm. Are individuals and institutions complicit in tipping points by failing to act decisively when early warning signs emerge? Moreover, can society develop mechanisms to identify and mitigate harmful tipping points before they escalate? By juxtaposing the opioid epidemic, white flight, and systemic negligence, Gladwell paints a nuanced portrait of tipping points as double-edged swords. They are neither inherently good nor bad. Their impact depends on the intentions, actions, and context that surround them. This chapter serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action, urging readers to remain vigilant against the darker potentials of social change. Chapter 3. Superspreaders and the Multiplication of Influence. At the heart of every tipping point lies a superspreader, an entity capable of magnifying influence far beyond what conventional actors achieve. Malcolm Gladwell's concept of the superspreader goes beyond epidemiological terms to encompass individuals, institutions, and ideas that serve as accelerators of change. These superspreaders are not inherently good or bad, but their impact is amplified by the systems and environments in which they operate. This chapter explores the anatomy of superspreaders, the mechanisms by which they wield influence, and the ethical dilemmas they pose. Defining the superspreader. Superspreaders are characterized by their disproportionate ability to ignite and sustain change. They are not necessarily the originators of an idea or movement but act as conduits through which it gains momentum. Gladwell identifies three key attributes of superspreaders. 1. Connectivity. Superspreaders are well connected within their networks, enabling them to transmit ideas or behaviors to a wide audience. 2. Credibility. They possess an inherent authority or trustworthiness that makes their message resonate more deeply. 3. Capacity. Superspreaders have the resources, energy, or strategic insight to sustain their influence over time. These attributes allow them to transcend the ordinary dynamics of influence, turning isolated sparks into full-blown phenomena. Case study: Media and cultural superspreaders. Gladwell delves into the role of media as a superspreader, particularly its ability to shape public opinion and societal norms. He recounts the story of Will and Grace, a television show credited with shifting attitudes towards same-sex marriage in the United States. By portraying gay characters in relatable and endearing ways, the show functioned as a cultural superspreader, normalizing LGBTQ+ relationships and paving the way for broader acceptance. However, the same media mechanisms can be co-opted for nefarious purposes. Gladwell examines how disinformation campaigns during election cycles operate as superspreaders of false narratives. These campaigns leverage social media algorithms to amplify divisive messages, often with devastating societal consequences. The case highlights the dual-edged nature of superspreader influence. It can unite or fracture, enlighten or deceive. Superspreaders in crisis, the pandemic paradigm. The COVID-19 pandemic offers a stark illustration of superspreaders in action. Gladwell analyzes both biological and social superspreaders, drawing parallels between the spread of the virus and the dissemination of misinformation. He focuses on the role of high-profile individuals who use their platforms to propagate false claims about treatments and vaccines, exacerbating public health challenges. These examples underscore a critical point. Superspreaders do not exist in a vacuum. Their impact is contingent upon the systems that enable their reach. Whether through algorithmic amplification or institutional negligence, the infrastructure surrounding superspreaders plays a pivotal role in determining their influence. Ethical quandaries of amplified influence. The chapter also considers the ethical implications of superspreader dynamics. Should society impose constraints on individuals or entities that wield disproportionate influence? And if so, who determines where the line is drawn? Gladwell explores these questions through the lens of social engineering, highlighting instances where deliberate efforts to curb superspreader influence, such as platform deplatforming, have sparked debates about free speech and accountability. Moreover, the ethical concerns extend to the systems that sustain superspreaders. Are social media companies, for example, morally obligated to redesign their algorithms to prioritize accuracy over engagement? Gladwell suggests that addressing these questions requires a nuanced understanding of both the benefits and risks associated with superspreader phenomena. Lessons from superspreaders. Gladwell urges readers to recognize the power of amplification, both as a tool for progress and as a potential threat. By understanding the dynamics of superspreader influence, individuals and institutions can better navigate the complexities of modern change. In the end, superspreaders are neither heroes nor villains. They are amplifiers of the forces that shape our world. Their impact depends not only on their actions but also on the environments that enable their reach. As society becomes increasingly interconnected, the role of superspreaders will only grow more pronounced, making it imperative to engage with their influence thoughtfully and critically. Chapter 4: Environmental Influence and the Ecology of Behavior. Environments, both physical and cultural, wield immense power over human behavior. They are the silent architects of tipping points, shaping the context in which change unfolds. Malcolm Gladwell's exploration of environmental influence and revenge of the tipping point illuminates the often unseen dynamics that enable or hinder transformative moments. This chapter delves into the ecology of behavior, examining how environments act as catalysts, amplifiers, and moderators of social phenomena. The overstory: contextual narratives. Gladwell introduces the concept of the overstory, the broader contextual narrative that underpins individual and collective behavior. Environments are more than backdrops. They are active participants in the drama of social change. Miami's Medicare fraud crisis, for example, was not merely the result of individual greed but a reflection of the city's unique overstory. Miami's reputation as a place of quick wealth and opportunism fostered a culture where exploiting systemic flaws became normalized. Gladwell reveals how this environmental narrative created fertile ground for fraud, making it almost inevitable. He argues that understanding the overstory is essential for diagnosing the root causes of tipping points. Without this contextual insight, efforts to address such crises risk being superficial and ineffective. Physical environments, architecture of action. The physical environment plays an equally significant role in shaping behavior. Gladwell highlights examples from urban design to illustrate how physical spaces influence social dynamics. In one case study, he examines how the layout of public housing projects contributed to the rise of gang activity. Poorly lit corridors, isolated stairwells, and lack of communal spaces created environments that encourage criminal behavior while discouraging community cohesion. Conversely, well-designed environments can foster positive tipping points. Gladwell cites the example of defensible space urban planning principles that enhance safety and community engagement. When physical spaces are designed to promote visibility, accessibility, and social interaction, they can deter crime and encourage collective responsibility. These examples underscore the profound impact of environmental design on social outcomes. Systemic fragilities: institutions as environments. Institutions, like physical environments, shape behavior by creating frameworks of incentives and constraints. Gladwell's analysis of systemic fragilities highlights how institutional environments can tip into dysfunction. The Flint water crisis serves as a case study of how bureaucratic inertia and cost-cutting measures created an institutional environment ripe for failure. Gladwell argues that systemic fragilities often arise from misaligned incentives and lack of accountability. In Flint, the prioritization of short-term cost savings over public health created a tipping point that poisoned an entire community. This example illustrates how institutional environments can amplify harm when their structures are not resilient or adaptive. Cultural environments, norms and narratives. Cultural environments, shaped by shared norms and narratives, exert a subtle but pervasive influence on behavior. Gladwell explores the phenomenon of monocultures, social or cultural environments characterized by homogeneity. In the affluent community of Poplar Grove, for example, a high-pressure culture centered on academic and athletic achievement led to alarming rates of teen suicide. This case study highlights the dangers of cultural environments that prioritize conformity over diversity. Gladwell argues that such environments create narrow definitions of success, leaving little room for failure or individuality. The resulting pressure can push individuals toward tipping points of despair. Leveraging environmental influence for good. Gladwell highlights initiatives that use environmental influence to drive social change, such as urban renewal projects that prioritize green spaces and community centers. He also examines efforts to reform institutional environments through transparency, accountability, and stakeholder engagement. Gladwell challenges readers to think critically about the environments they inhabit and influence. Are these environments enabling progress or perpetuating harm? How can they be restructured to foster resilience and adaptability? By addressing these questions, he argues society can harness the power of environmental influence to create tipping points that lead to lasting, positive change. In The Ecology of Behavior, environments are both mirrors and architects of society. They reflect our values while shaping the possibilities for action. Understanding their role in tipping points is not just an academic exercise, it is a call to action for individuals, institutions, and communities to design environments that nurture the best of human potential. Chapter 5. The Power of Language in Shaping Tipping Points. Language, though often overlooked, wields unparalleled influence in shaping human perception and behavior. In moments of crisis, language serves as both a lifeline and a battlefield. Gladwell begins this discussion by analyzing a hypothetical pandemic-related hearing in which the passive phrase "mistakes were made" becomes emblematic of evasive accountability. By framing failures in the passive voice, decision-makers diffuse responsibility, eroding public trust and undermining collective action. Conversely, active and transparent communication can serve as a powerful antidote to chaos. Gladwell highlights instances where clear, direct language galvanized communities in the face of disaster. The post-9/11, "If you see something, say something" campaign, for example, fostered a sense of collective vigilance, demonstrating how concise messaging can rally individuals around a shared purpose. Language, in this context, acts as a conduit for both clarity and action, proving instrumental in steering tipping points towards stability. The weaponization of words. While language can unify, it is equally potent as a tool of division. Gladwell examines how propaganda and disinformation campaigns leverage linguistic subtleties to manipulate perceptions. During the 2016 U.S. presidential election, for instance, targeted social media ads employed emotionally charged language to deepen societal divisions. By invoking fear and resentment, these campaigns exploited linguistic triggers to amplify polarization and create tipping points of societal unrest. This dual-edged nature of language raises important questions. How can society safeguard against the weaponization of words? What responsibilities do media platforms bear in regulating harmful linguistic content? Gladwell's analysis underscores the urgent need for a more critical engagement with the language that saturates our information ecosystems. Cultural narratives and the language of inclusion. Beyond crises and conflicts, language shapes cultural narratives that influence societal norms and behaviors. Gladwell explores how shifts in language reflect and reinforce broader cultural changes. The evolution of terms like disabled to differently abled, for instance, illustrates how inclusive language can reframe societal perceptions and reduce stigma. However, Gladwell also warns against the pitfalls of performative linguistic shifts. When changes in language are not accompanied by substantive action, they risk becoming hollow gestures. He cites corporate diversity statements that adopt inclusive language without addressing structural inequities as examples of this phenomenon. True tipping points, Gladwell argues, require alignment between words and actions. Language and power dynamics. Gladwell explores how linguistic choices reflect and reinforce existing hierarchies. In corporate settings, for example, jargon-laden communication can create barriers between leadership and employees, perpetuating power imbalances. Similarly, the legal system's reliance on complex terminology often alienates laypeople, limiting access to justice. Yet, language can also democratize power. Gladwell examines grassroots movements that harness plain, relatable language to mobilize support and challenge entrenched systems. The civil rights movement's use of phrases like "I am a man" exemplifies the power of simple, evocative language to inspire solidarity and demand recognition. Navigating the ethics of language. Gladwell urges readers to consider the broader implications of their words. Do they clarify or confuse? Empower or exclude? By fostering a more intentional relationship with language, individuals and institutions can better navigate the complex interplay between communication and influence. Language, as Gladwell demonstrates, is far more than a medium of expression. It is a force that shapes reality. From steering crises to redefining cultural norms, its power to influence tipping points is both profound and pervasive. Recognizing this power is the first step toward wielding it responsibly, ensuring that the words we choose contribute to progress rather than regression. Conclusion: embracing the duality of tipping points. Tipping points are both marvels of human ingenuity and cautionary tales of unintended consequences. They embody the delicate interplay between individuals, systems, and environments, showing how small acts can ripple into transformative movements or disastrous collapses. The mechanics of tipping points, as outlined in earlier chapters, reveal a consistent pattern, a convergence of superspreaders, environmental contexts, and linguistic or cultural catalysts. Whether it is a single physician amplifying the opioid crisis, the physical layout of a community fostering gang activity, or language weaponized to polarize, tipping points rarely emerge in isolation. Gladwell's exploration of these interconnected dynamics underscores an important lesson. To anticipate tipping points, we must analyze the systems that enable them. This interconnectedness also challenges the notion of linear causality. Instead, tipping points thrive in the complexity of feedback loops, where individual actions reinforce systemic trends, and vice versa. Gladwell's work invites readers to move beyond simplistic explanations and embrace the complex networks that drive change. Central to Gladwell's thesis is the ethical dimension of tipping points. While these moments hold immense potential for progress, they also pose profound risks. The opioid epidemic, white flight, and systemic failures like the Flint water crisis illustrate how tipping points can perpetuate harm when driven by neglect or exploitation. Conversely, positive tipping points, such as the cultural shift toward LGBTQ+ acceptance, demonstrate the transformative power of intentionally. Gladwell emphasizes the importance of aligning means and ends, urging individuals and institutions to consider the broader implications of their actions. What values guide the choices that lead to tipping points? How can we mitigate harm while fostering progress? These questions serve as the moral compass of Revenge of the Tipping Point. Learning to navigate tipping points. Gladwell provides a framework for identifying emerging tipping points, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and adaptability. 1. Recognize superspreaders. Pay attention to individuals or entities whose influence extends disproportionately. Understanding their motivations and actions can provide early indicators of potential tipping points. 2. Analyze environments. Examine the physical, cultural, and systemic contexts that shape behavior. Are these environments fostering resilience or vulnerability? 3. Harness language. Use language intentionally, recognizing its power to unify, divide, or inspire. Transparent and inclusive communication can steer tipping points toward constructive outcomes. 4. Act early. Intervene at the nascent stages of tipping points, before they spiral into full-blown crises. Proactive measures can prevent harmful cascades and amplify positive change. Embracing complexity. Gladwell's conclusion also serves as a call to embrace the complexity of tipping points. Rather than seeking definitive answers, he encourages readers to cultivate curiosity and humility. Tipping points, after all, are not merely phenomena to be studied. They are reflections of human agency and societal values. By understanding their dynamics, we gain not only the tools to navigate change but also the opportunity to shape it. A final reflection. Revenge of the Tipping Point closes with a profound reminder. The power to create and disrupt tipping points lies within each of us. Whether as individuals, leaders, or members of a community, our choices contribute to the broader currents of change. Gladwell leaves readers with an enduring challenge: to wield this power responsibly, with an awareness of both its potential and its peril. In a world increasingly defined by rapid transformations, the insights of Revenge of the Tipping Point are more relevant than ever. They offer not only a lens for understanding the past but also a guide for navigating the future. As we confront the tipping points that shape our lives, may we do so with wisdom, foresight, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good.